being recorded. So yeah, just please keep that in mind, and it will be published afterwards. So yeah, as I said, this is the first of 5 events, one with each of the main political parties in Scotland prior to May's parliamentary elections. And we're going to be looking at the party's vision for sustainable transport should they be elected. So with transport accounting for the largest share of emissions of any sector at 36%, and having seen really no progress in 30 years, this next parliament will prove crucial should Scotland be able to reverse that trend. So with that in mind, I'm going to very quickly just share my screen and run over a few using Zoom things. I will try and keep it brief because I'm sure lots of you have seen this kind of thing before. You are all set to mute at the moment. I will mute everyone just as we start with the Q&A as well. Please ensure you're kept to mute when you're not speaking. It just prevents any background noise. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat function. This is different to previous Transform events, so please keep that in mind. If you type your question into the chat, then our chair, Alistair, will do his best to get to what ones he can. And then he will pass to you if he wants you to ask your question out loud. If you could introduce yourself before speaking, that always helps as well. And if you could pass back to the chair once you've finished, just to make sure that we can keep the conversation flowing. And then the final thing is that if the call shuts off, it is most likely just an internet failure, just a local issue on your own device. So please give it 30 seconds, it should reboot. If that fails, then just click the original invite link again after a few minutes, and it should be fixed by then. If it's a more fundamental problem, we should have got things up and running by then. So with that, I will pass over to Alistair, who's going to give a more detailed introduction, and then we'll get started.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt, and good afternoon from Glasgow. And a special welcome to Graham Simpson, who's the Scottish Conservatives spokesperson on transport, among other things, who I believe is just up the road from me here. Now, I know Graham has a way with words, not just as a politician, but for tabloid headlines, because for 26 years he was at the Scottish Sun, latterly deputy chief sub-editor. Those are the people who come up with some of the great and not so great puns. I see he's also a cyclist, good on you for that, but he says not in the rain, not so good. Now, Graham once got criticised for saying that there were no-go areas in our cities. Well, there will be no no-go areas in the next hour. Right, well, welcome, Graham. Over to you. You have 5 minutes, no more, please, to set out your transport priorities.
Well, thanks very much, Alistair, and thank you, Matt. And can I thank the team at Transform Scotland who have got to know over the years. I am a deputy convener of the cross-party group on cycling, walking and buses, so I know that some of you on this call will be regular attendees of that group, so you'll know me from there. Some of you are not, of course. I'm not sure which is more nerve-wracking, actually taking part in an actual event where people are in the room and can shout at you and gesticulate, or looking at a sea of disapproving faces on my computer. We'll see at the end, but I suppose we're all getting used to this now, aren't we? And we're getting used to it because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that has forced this this kind of format onto all of us. And really, what's happened over the past 10 months or so has changed everything, and it's changed the way we look at transport as well as a whole load of other policy areas. So I think that going into the Scottish Parliament elections, we are dealing with recovery, and we are dealing with how the pandemic has changed people's behaviour. I think there's probably no danger of me going over my 5 minutes, but I often say that, and I often do, given that, as Alistair said, I used to be an expert in snappy headlines. I've probably lost that a bit since I've gone into the Scottish Parliament. But I always like to turn things around on how do things affect real people? We all live in various bubbles, and a lot of you are members of various campaign groups, and there's a danger that you just think about the campaign group that you're in, or the bubble that you're in. I tend to think about how does this affect real people? So when we're talking about transport policies or any area, that's what I'm thinking of. If we're looking at active travel, as Alistair said, yes, I'm a cyclist. No, I don't like cycling in the rain because I don't like getting wet. And I don't go out in the snow because I don't want to slip about. But I am a keen cyclist. I do enjoy cycling, and I am very much in favour of anything that will help people to cycle and walk more often and make it feel safer. So I've absolutely no doubt that we will have questions about spaces for people today. I hope we do. I'm very keen on spaces for people if it's done properly. So I'm very keen on active travel. We can talk about that when we come to questions. I want to see the bus industry recover because it's in a bad place, as are trains. So we need to do everything we can to get people onto buses and onto trains and probably use their cars less. But some people do need to use their cars. Now, some of you on this call are probably thinking, what's he on about? You know, we want to get people out of their cars. Yes, but there's a balance to be struck. So I think I'm going to leave it there. The only other thing I would say is when you come on calls like this and you see people's names, there are some funny ones and you're trying to figure out what's that all about. So when your names flash up on the screen, we've got Steve Wood of the A96, which I think is short for A96 Action Group, and we've got someone called Asus Laptop and someone called Correct. So maybe we'll find out who Asus Laptop is, and we'll hear from Steve Wood, and we'll find out who Corrector is. But I'll leave it there, and we'll go into questions.
That's very impressive, Graham. That's a minute below time, so that's a good start to the series. Okay, well, the first question will come from Keith Irvine, who's Chief Executive of Cycling Scotland, who wants to know, does the climate emergency mean we should take radical steps to reduce the miles driven on our roads?
Is Keith there? Say hello, Keith, if you're on the call. He's not even here. Right, okay. Well, if Keith was here, I'd be saying hello, Keith, and it's been great to work with Keith over the years. I actually set up a cycling working group when I was a councillor in South Lanarkshire. There was quite a bit of resistance from council officers at the time, but we got it set up. I'm a huge enthusiast, as I said at the start, for getting people out of their cars and getting people more active, but I'm not anti-car. I am not anti-car. I am pro-cyclist, but I don't think that makes you anti-car. And what I want to do, I think what's happened during the pandemic is more people have turned to cycling and they have turned to walking, and that's a fact, and the figures show that. And what I want to see happen is as we emerge from the pandemic and life returns to a bit more normality, is that we can maintain that progress, because it's a good thing. It's inherently a good thing that people get around under their own steam if they can. It's good for their mental health, it's good for their physical health, and it's good for the environment. So we need policies, I think, and I've drawn up a list of them for my own party, which have been enthusiastically received, by the way, that will enable us to maintain that progress. So we need to make, but basically what we need to do is make things feel safe, so that people who are not, they're not the most confident cyclists necessarily, will feel safe about getting on a bike. So it's that progress that we need to maintain.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Perhaps at this stage I could bring in Jim Densham from Cycling UK Scotland, who's on the Transform Scotland panel. What do you make of the response to the question, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I totally understand, Graham's point of view that, you don't have to be against cars to be a pro cyclist. I mean, many people who are cyclists are also car drivers. I am one myself. And we do need those. It's all about finding the right ways and finding ways which can really help people to get out of their cars, leave them behind, think, well, it's an actually easier way to cycle into town or to get on the bus than to get into the car. And we need to find measures that make that happen. So, perhaps one of the questions back is what sort of measures would really help to drive that forward in the future in Scotland? Because it's all well and good to say we want to make this happen, but it's always comes down to what are the actual policy measures going to be, like low emission zones or congestion charging or things like that, which can actually not force but encourage people to choose other forms of transport. And obviously if you're a cyclist, a way to get onto bikes and feel safe on a bike is to create more cycling infrastructure, and that's the sort of thing that we would like to see. So for me, that's a question back again to Graham.
Yeah, Graham, there's a comment in the chat I see here from Tricia Fort about what actual policies do the Conservatives have to get people out of cars and onto bikes.
Okay, right. Well, I can give it. Well, thanks for that, Tricia, and thanks, Jim. It's good to see you, Jim, again. Jim and I have spoken about this in some detail. So, Tricia, you've asked for actual policies, so I'm going to give you an unusually long answer, and that's not normal for me, but you did ask, so you're entitled to a proper answer. So I've drawn up a series of proposals for my own party. Now, bear in mind, when I give my answer, we've not actually published a manifesto yet. So I'm just being sort of open with you about these are my thoughts. They're not down in writing yet within our own party. But I'm very clear that cycling is popular. I think people like it. We've seen studies. Sustrans did a study UK-wide that showed widespread support across the UK, and that includes in Scotland, for more segregated routes in Inverness, in Dundee, in Edinburgh, wherever you are, there is support for this. I have broken down our active travel, call it a manifesto if you like, into 4 themes. The 4 themes are better streets for cycling and people. Cycling and walking should be at the heart of decision making. Empowering and encouraging local authorities and enabling people to cycle and protecting them when they do. Now, if you want, I'll go through each of those. So for better streets for cycling and walking, I am saying that there should be more funding. So we should increase the level of funding gradually from what it is now. I think that each city should have a high quality and segregated main cycle network with at least 2 key routes that would allow a safe daily commute and reduce dependence on private motor vehicles. And once delivered, we would expect cities to develop a network plan. Now, I know that in Edinburgh, that's not largely, it's not all that popular in parts of Edinburgh, but I think if you want to move things, that's the way we should be going. Now, putting cycling and walking at the heart of transport. Now I've got other policies underneath that, but we could use up the entire hour if I was to read all this out. Putting cycling and walking at the heart of transport, placemaking, and health policy. I think we need to create a long-term cycling walking program and budget, a bit like the roads program. We should ensure that all new local and strategic A road schemes, and I'm not against building new roads, by the way, but they should include appropriate provision for cycling. So that's, in my view, segregated routes. Empowering local authorities, we should, as I said earlier, increase the funding for councils from what it is now, but I would only fund schemes that meet a certain set of standards. Now, I'm not saying what the standards should be, but I think we should set those standards nationally, and councils would only get the money if they meet them. And then finally, enable people to cycle and protect them when they cycle. I think we should provide cycle training, if you want it, for all adults and children. When I was a councillor, I took part in some cycle training. It was for teachers, and they were being trained how to teach pupils. I was quite alarmed at the number of teachers who couldn't ride a bike. So I think, you know, if you want adults to feel safer about cycling, then we should offer training.
Okay.
I'll leave it there because I've rambled on a bit, and that's not like me.
Thanks, Graham. Right, we're going to have tighter answers from now on, but I mean, I think it's justified to set out your view there. So, segregated cycle routes is important to you. An associated question is coming from Bob, who says, how do we practically and quickly reallocate road space from cars to active travel schemes like cycling, walking?
Well, Bob, that would depend on what's there now. There are clearly some routes that you physically couldn't fit a segregated route onto it, and I think this is probably where, you know, some of the problems have occurred in Edinburgh. I don't want to get too local, but the Edinburgh Spaces for People rollout has been controversial, no doubt about it. I haven't encountered that controversy elsewhere in the country. So it depends what's there, is the answer. If there's space, then you can put in a segregated route. And if there isn't, then maybe you need to rethink and put it elsewhere.
Okay. You've mentioned Edinburgh a couple of times, and this is perhaps a good moment to bring in what somebody has mentioned, has noted as an apparent disconnect between the support shown by Boris Johnson and Grant Shapps and the UK government for fast delivery of active travel schemes south of the border, and then much the opposition in Scotland to such schemes, particularly in Edinburgh, seems to come from Conservative councillors.
Yeah, that's why I've mentioned it, because no avoiding this. Our councillors in Edinburgh are not against the programme, they're against the way it's been done. And I would say I have a great deal of sympathy with that. I remember at the start of Spaces for People that Edinburgh Council was closing roads without consulting with local councillors and without consulting with the people who lived in the roads. And that's not the way to do it. If you want to, you need to bring people with you, because some of this stuff is not easy for people. It's a big change. So you need to bring people with you. And if you want to bring people with you, you have to involve the local councillors. That's what they're elected for. And you have to involve local communities, but you have to mean it. So there is a thing in some councils where the council officers think they run the show and they think they're the decision makers. And I think there's an element of, it seems to me that there's an element of that in Edinburgh. I'm really disappointed in the way Edinburgh have gone about things. I'm not saying that Spaces for People is a bad thing in Edinburgh. I think it's a good thing, but you need to do it the right way.
Perhaps I could bring in Stuart Hay of Living Streets at this point. Stuart, would you agree that the council hasn't properly consulted on the Spaces for People schemes?
I think you've got to put the scheme in its context, which was an emergency health measure to give people transport options. So it's not a normal way of doing things, and they've done it quickly, and there'll be lessons learned from that. So I wouldn't be critical of what's happened. I think you just have to learn the lessons from that. But fundamentally, there will be people who do not like these schemes because they don't see themselves as people who walk or cycle, and we need to change that. Everybody needs to see themselves as walkers and cyclists. And when you take away road space and parking, there is a backlash. But sometimes you do have to face that down, and they did do that in London, and they have a growing network. And it will get easier over time. But if we constantly say it's just too difficult, then nothing really changes, or we end up with small fragmented pieces of infrastructure. And I think the thing in Edinburgh, this is the first time they've really went big on trying to tackle routes. And that means you do hit streets where you have to take away space from motorists, and they've done it. And I think you need to give it a chance to see how well it works.
Graham, any response to that?
Yeah, I think the problem is, Stuart, that there was always a fear or a suspicion that when Edinburgh, and we are talking about Edinburgh at the moment, Edinburgh put in what were described as temporary measures, and there was a suspicion that they didn't really mean they were temporary. All along, they meant for them to be permanent, and now, of course, they've announced that some of them are going to be permanent. So I think, much as you and I like this stuff, not everybody does, and that's my point, is that councils need to, you just have to do this properly. You know, you don't want to put things in and get a huge backlash. If you're getting a huge backlash, something's gone wrong, because this is good. This is good stuff. It helps people, it helps the environment. So if you've got massive campaigns against it, something has gone wrong, Stuart. So I really think Edinburgh need to take a good hard look at this, because I'm not aware of these issues anywhere else in Scotland. And Spaces for People has been popular throughout the country. Edinburgh is the only place that I'm aware of where there is this backlash. And the council need to look at the way they've done it.
I think there is other schemes that have been pulled back in Perth and Aberdeen and various other places. So I don't think Edinburgh is alone in this, but I think you're always going to get a backlash to some extent. And I think sometimes you just have to do that. And I think I think where you're right is when we get back to normal, you can spend more time in engaging people. But at the end of the day, some people will not like this change until it happens, and they might actually like it once it's happened, but they will always speculate that I'm just going to lose something. What have I got to gain? But actually, when they get a street that is quiet, that is pleasant, that the kids can play on, I don't think they'll want to actually go back the way. And we saw that this was 20 miles an hour in Edinburgh. There was a massive backlash against that. It's just part of the city fabric now. Now there's a way to go on that, but it just shows you how quickly these campaigns pop up and disappear.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat box, now I've said it was only Edinburgh. It clearly isn't. There are U-turns in Perth and resistance in St Andrews. But it's improving. Is Andy Hadshaw there?
Okay, well, not wanting to go too much down a cul-de-sac on this and to sort of address some related other issues. Looking at roads more generally, Graham, isn't major schemes like the dualling of the A9 and the A96 at a combined cost of at least £6 billion incompatible with the climate emergency? Is it justified to continue with that sort of scale of road building?
Yes, I think it is. I think you have to accept that Scotland needs to be kept moving. Not every journey can be done by bike or on foot. People do need to get about longer distances, and there are some roads that aren't fit for purpose, and the A9 is one of them. and the A96. So you mentioned both roads. I think they both need to be upgraded. And I was actually disappointed when I heard the other day that the programs to do both those roads seem to have been delayed. So I think there is a balance to be struck. Now, you know, I think vehicles are going to become, you know, they will deliver less congestion as we move towards electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, possibly hydrogen as well. The capacity for vehicles to pump out sort of fumes into the atmosphere will be less. So I'm certainly not against new roads or upgrading existing roads where they need to be done.
How about your party leader, Douglas Ross, who's called for an additional lane on the M8 between Edinburgh and Glasgow? Surely extra capacity like that will just make things worse.
Well, you could argue that it would make things better. You know, you've got a road that is quite often congested. Certainly in normal times, Alistair, you know, not at the moment. It doesn't get congested at the moment. But once we're out of this pandemic and traffic levels return to what you might describe as a more normal level, then that is the main east-west artery in Scotland, and it's frankly it's essential for people to get about. So for that road to be dual carriageway for large parts of it, I think is a nonsense. It needs to be a proper motorway. Okay,
this would be an opportunity to bring in Julianne Robertson of Explore Dundee for response on road space allocation. Julianne, you work for a bus operator. I mean, how do you feel about the relative allocation of space for cars, buses and other vehicles, both within urban areas but between them?
Well, yes, to come back to the immediate point that's just been made, it worries me that the idea of building extra roads is seen as the solution instead of actually reducing the congestion, which is the problem at the heart of all that. But also, yeah, I'm not hearing much on allocation of space for bus either. I understand that cycling is a priority, and there needs to be some tackling of making things safer. I think that's great. It's good for health and everything. But the problem is that if space is taken away from bus and given to cyclists, you're compromising practically the whole of the transport system. Anything which slows down buses, narrowing the streets or making them more congested, is going to reduce the appeal of bus and make commuters less likely to use them. So you get more people in their cars. There's just, unfortunately, no comparison between the number of people who use a bus versus cyclists. And with the best will in the world, you're never going to convert enough people to a bike to be able to make that much of a difference to taking people out of their cars and using a different way of travel. So yeah, I would like to know what Graham would like to do about encouraging more people into bus or disincentivizing car use, and whether there's some balance that they're hoping for in terms of road use, whether they're taking into account buses in all of this discussion.
And that's also something that Ralph Roberts, the managing director of McGill's Buses, is interested in. How do you help the bus sector recover where numbers have fallen substantially over recent years, mainly due to congestion and low bus speeds? So that it is by far the biggest part of our public transport sector. So Graham, how do you help the bus industry recover?
Yeah, well, thanks, Julianne. It's really good to hear from you, and perhaps we could have a separate conversation, if that's all right, afterwards. Maybe not today, but at some point, if you want to get in touch, I'd really love to speak to you. I think you've made a really good point about buses. We need to look. So the first thing is that patronage on buses has obviously really fallen. There's not that many people using them at the moment. But again, in normal times, it's one of the most popular forms of transport, or it was. My view is, as someone, and I'll admit, I don't use the buses very often, and largely the reason for that is where I live, the bus service is rubbish. And if it was better, I would probably use it. Where I live, we've gone from a service which was once every half an hour to a service which is now once an hour. So the result of that is most people don't use the bus, and they just drive. So it seems to me that if you want people to use the bus, you need to provide a good bus service, and that needs to be funded. And I think that's where the provisions in the Transport Act come in. And I'd like to see councils, if they want to, band together to organise sort of city-wide bus services. I think there's a huge opportunity in Glasgow, for instance, to do this. And I live in East Kilbride, which is on the periphery of Glasgow. So buses go from here into Glasgow and out. So buses go from Glasgow into South Lanarkshire and North Lanarkshire and all around that. So I think you need that integrated system. But buses, you need to have that integrated bus system. It needs to be easy for people to use, and that's where we come onto smart cards. I shouldn't have to ask what the fare is when I get on a bus. I should just be able to tap on, tap off, or whatever. Be able to use the same card on a train. You've got to make it easy for folk, and I think at the moment it's not that easy, and there are far too many dead zones, I would describe them as, where they either don't have a bus, or the bus service, as it is in my case, is not very good. So we do need to have an overarching look at this. Maybe you're doing that in Dundee, I don't know. We can talk about that.
Julianne, any response to what you've heard?
I think, yeah, partnership is important. I think that, and I would accept there's some way for some operators to go, perhaps in simplifying the whole system, the whole process of getting on the bus and everything. But you're describing the vicious circle of not enough people using the bus, therefore routes get cut and everything. We need to go back to the idea of encouraging more people to get on the bus, making it less attractive for people to use the car, making it more attractive to get on the bus. Therefore, patronage increases, investment improves, services are extended. We need to go to the virtuous circle and away from the vicious cycle.
So I suppose the question is, how do you make it more attractive? So what makes it more attractive is if there are regular buses, the fares are reasonable, it's easy to use, it turns up when it should do, and I think also I quite like these bus stops, and you see them in Edinburgh, where it will tell you when the bus is coming. But we don't have that. We don't have that everywhere. So I think you need.
Yeah, all these things are quite nice window dressing, but it's and operators are doing as much as they possibly can in those areas. But if the roads are so congested that a bus journey takes, I don't know, twice as long to get where it's supposed to be going, then people don't want to catch the bus, so they go in their car. If we can improve the bus journeys for the buses, put in road priority measures, make it less attractive to get in the car, more people get on the bus, and then all these things, which the people, it becomes a more attractive prospect. It becomes far more attractive than even getting the car to begin with. and all these things will follow, because the bus journey is pleasant and it's enjoyable, and the operators then have the revenue to be able to invest in more and better things to make it even more attractive.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with you on that. So I think bus priority lanes, yes, I'd agree, completely agree with you. I'm not against that. So
Yeah.
I think we do need to make bus travel easier, more pleasant. And when you get on that bus, so when I'll give you an example, Julianne. The last time I used the bus to go into Glasgow, it was only because the train was off. It took an hour. Now I could have cycled into Glasgow quicker, and that's because of the congestion and because it stopped so often. So you know, you need to look at that. So if it's going to take me an hour to get into Glasgow, a journey that I could achieve by bike in half an hour, then because it's downhill, I can go quite quickly. Then that's nonsense. So people are not going to use the bus if it takes that long. So yes, we do need to make things easier.
I want to talk a bit about rail now. It hasn't been mentioned. It's far less significant as far as passenger numbers than bus, but it is of a huge cost to the Scottish Government. It's the ScotRail franchise this year, with the extra support needed because of COVID, will be the best part of £1 billion. It's the biggest single Scottish Government contract. But when we talk about road schemes being on a big scale, the other aspect to that is the disparity with spending on rail. And now David Spaven, formerly of the Rail Freight Group, has pointed out that in relation to the A9 dualling, the railway runs parallel between Perth and Inverness, and yet is largely single track. Freight trains can't run at the length they could, even though they are far less polluting than lorries on the roads. So isn't there a case when you're upgrading roads to do a similar amount, if not more, for rail and others, such as with the A9, Graham?
I guess the short answer is yes. I'm very much in favour of improving our railways, and I would look at. I think we need to decarbonise the rail network. That is, to be fair, that is going on. But again, if I can cheekily refer to East Kilbride again, if you don't mind, our rail service into Glasgow is currently diesel, and it is the line is going to be electrified, but that particular line lends itself, I think, to battery operated trains. So I think I'd like to see more of that where it's appropriate, and also possibly hydrogen. And we should look at, we've already announced this policy, look at where possible, reopening old lines. That's not always possible, of course, but I think where it's appropriate, we should be doing that. So I'm very much in favour of rail.
Paul Tetlaw, you're the rail person at Transform Scotland. What's your thoughts on what you just heard? If you're there.
You're on mute, Paul.
That's better. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think if we could go back, Graham, to A9 and Highland Main Line, because they are the classic best examples of the difference between investment in road and rail. Now, Alex Salmond, the First Minister, promised over a dozen years ago now to reduce that journey time by rail by 45 minutes, I think, from Inverness to Edinburgh. None of that's happened at all. They've just tinkered at the margins, but they go steaming ahead with dualling the A9. And you said that's one of the cases that I can't remember your exact words. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you suggested it's a very worthy road. It needed upgrading. Now, on what basis did it need upgrading? It was never the most dangerous road. The media had us believe that, but it never was. We've now got average speed cameras, and the rate of accidents has come tumbling down. So if it was on accidents, the right approach was surely average speed cameras. So that railway is largely single track. We could attract a lot of that traffic off the road onto the railway if we had a similar level of investment. And David Spademan might give me a better answer on what that would cost, but my understanding is you could upgrade that railway for about £1 billion to dual track and electrification, and yet that's nowhere in the current Scottish Government's proposal. So where do you see the balance between investment in the two? Because at the moment it's heavily skewed towards the road, and the government's own figures show that will lead to more modal shift from train to road.
Okay.
I finished there.
Yeah, you're done. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Paul. I don't think we should get into this situation where it's road v rail or you know, car versus bike. There surely has to be a place for everything, because yes, I think we should encourage. Yeah, we need to drive. We should be driving people onto the trains. You need to make that better. I'll apologise. I'm not familiar with that line that you mentioned, but I'll go away and have a look at it. I don't know where it goes to or from, but it strikes me if it's single track, then it shouldn't be. It should be double track. Paul, where does it start and finish?
It just parallels the road, Graham. It goes from Perth to Inverness.
Okay. Well,
parallel virtually all the way. It parallels the road.
Right. Well, I mean, if that's just a single track, then that, you know, clearly it shouldn't be. I think so. We need to look at that. And I'm guessing, I may be guessing wrong. Is it electrified or not?
No, it's not electrified.
It's not. So, you know, again, that if it's not electrified, it should be, because we want to get away from you know, diesel. I'm presuming it is diesel. So you know, electrify it, or have a look at hydrogen technology, or battery trains.
Yeah, can we just put a little pause on this battery and hydrogen? It's fine for the most rural of lines, perhaps the West Highland line and so on, to be looking at these, but for by far the most efficient way of running a railway is electrification. So all the main lines and your East Kilbride line, actually all the main commuter lines, should be electrified. It's far more efficient in any medium to longer term, and operating costs come down much running electric trains as opposed to diesel or battery or hydrogen. So there is a place on the margins for battery and possibly hydrogen, but it's very much on the margins. The main network between the cities and the main commuter routes, I think that there's overwhelming evidence electrification is the best way forward.
Okay, I want to continue on electrification, but back onto the roads, because the Scottish Government have boasted about the number of electric vehicle chargers they have compared to other parts of the UK, and they're seeing this as a major part of their strategy. I talk about even the electric A9. David Murray asks, Graham, would you acknowledge though that electric cars per se are not the solution to creating a greener country?
I'm not quite sure what he's driving up there. I would ask him what he thinks is the solution. I think electric cars can be part of the solution, but they're clearly not going to be for everyone. And I mean, I'm in a position that I've got you know, if I will be looking to get a newer car fairly soon. So I've got a decision to make. do I stick to petrol as I've got now? Do I go hybrid? Do I go electric? If I go electric, I will be making the same decision as a lot of people have to make. Is that vehicle going to get me the sometimes long distances that I have to drive? And at the moment, I think the answer is possibly no, because of that lack of charging points. So I think it's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? If you want people to switch to electric, then you need to put in the infrastructure, and that infrastructure shouldn't just be on the main roads. It needs to be in towns and cities. I think you need to put charging points in the street. So if you think, Alistair, if you live in Glasgow, a lot of that is tenemented property. So what you obviously, you can't have cables running from people's bedroom windows. So I think you need to be looking at having charging points in the street to encourage people to move into electric vehicles. But it's not for everyone. The questioner is right. It isn't for everyone. Hybrid, possibly hydrogen vehicles. We've not heard much about that, but I think the technology needs to move in that direction.
Stuart Hay, what does Living Streets think of electric cars? You think of any differently than to
Yeah, I think they solve one problem, and I think this is what the question is referring to, and that they eliminate the tailpipe emissions. And if Scotland has a good renewable mix and its electricity supply, that will be a good thing. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't solve all the air pollution problems. We've still got tyre wear, we've still got brake wear, and they're actually quite significant elements of it. You still got wear of the tyres going to workshop. So there is still, they're not entirely green, and you also are changing the entire stock of vehicles in the country, and that's a lot of energy that would go into doing that to start off with. And finally, you've got issues with congestion. You've exactly the same amount of congestion in all the roads right across Scotland, especially in urban areas. In fact, it could get worse if it's cheaper to drive. Once you've bought it, the upfront costs more, but once you have them, it's cheaper to run them. Then people could choose them instead of public transport or other modes. So I think there's real issues we need to grapple with on electric vehicles.
An associated theme, Frank Toner, sorry, the whole of his name is hidden, is saying, would the Conservatives be interested in expanding low emission zones from the 4 cities that they're planned for just now?
I think that's frankly up to individual councils, and I wouldn't be saying. I think if it's appropriate in a council area, then yes. If the emission levels are so high that you need to do that, then the answer would be yes. I think it's a local decision.
Julianne, does Explore Dundee or Transform, do you have a view on whether LEZ should be expanded to other urban areas? I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Me personally, I'm waiting to see how the rollout goes in Dundee. We're obviously making plans for that coming. And in terms of the bus company, we're working alongside the council, and we've submitted all our views to them. Still a bit fuzzy, I think, on how it's all going to work. But I certainly think there's a place for that sort of thing. Personally, I think anything which will discourage cars journeying into a city centre or a town centre has got to be a good thing. And in fact, yeah, personally, I'd probably go quite hard on that, because you look at other cities who have significantly reduced their car use, other cities in Europe, and it's an attractive, healthy place to be when people are moving around on foot and on bikes, and in fact there's evidence to show that it doesn't damage the communities. In fact, it enhances them. It doesn't damage business. There are ways to get around the issues that people raise. So yeah, I personally think it's got to be a good thing. So it'll be interesting to see how they roll out in Scotland and maybe how they can be developed or used elsewhere.
Yeah, the question is how will it practically work? If we accept that, you know, people will still drive to Dundee or Glasgow or Edinburgh or whatever, and if you suddenly hit signs that say don't come here, don't come through,
yeah,
where are they then going to go? It's a matter of behaviour, isn't it? So you've got to deal with that, and that's where it comes down. That's why I'm saying it's a local decision. So Dundee has to get that right. They have somewhere for people to park and ride or whatever.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that we would certainly be looking into and proposing to the council as a really good solution for that. As well, and Dundee also is quite well equipped in terms now of electric bikes, and it's developing a big travel hub on the waterfront as well, which hopefully will encourage people to choose different modes as well.
Yeah.
Since you've just mentioned electric bikes, I was going to talk about that as well, that they're now for the first time available in numbers in parts of Scotland, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Forth Valley area, helping people who are slightly less able to get into cycling. George Lauder, who's Chief Executive of Transport for Edinburgh, which is in charge of the Edinburgh scheme, says, do you agree with that the success of these schemes has positively contributed to Scottish Government commitments on active travel? And if so, should we prioritise investment in such schemes to provide a cost-effective and a sustainable way to support those trying to get to work, get out of poverty, improve connectivity, particularly in areas of deprivation, and make a significant contribution to sustainability and active travel targets, i.e. should we be putting more money into these schemes?
Are we talking about cycle hire schemes in general?
Yeah, sorry, cycle hire schemes like the Just Eat Cycles one in Edinburgh and similar one in Glasgow and Forth Valley, and Dundee as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. The one I'm most familiar is the Edinburgh one. That's because I spend quite a bit of time in Edinburgh. Glasgow also seems to have been popular. I think it's inherently a good thing because it does get people cycling, so that is good. I think electric bikes are also a good thing because it's going to help people who maybe just don't want to get about necessarily under their own steam, and it'll help people where it's hilly, parts of Edinburgh are, and certainly parts of Glasgow are. So I think they all have a place. So the answer, Alistair, is yes. No, I've never personally hired one of these bikes because I've never needed to. I normally take my own, but I could well see if I went to a city where I didn't have my bike that I probably would. So yeah, more of it.
We've got a few minutes left. I've got one more question on cycling and I want to bring Jim Densham in. So Graham, if you could be brief on this one, quite an interesting one from Keith Irvine of Cycling Scotland, saying, as a politician, do you think cycling routes should be built where they will create the most use or the least complaints?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think, well, the answer is most use, because what you don't want to do is spend public money on something that isn't used, because that will be a waste of public money. But sometimes just by putting something in, it will encourage people to use them. So the complaints bit, I think we've dealt with that. I think there are ways of dealing with that. So the answer is do it properly, consult properly, but put it in somewhere where it's going to be used, where it's going to be popular.
What do you think of that, Jim? Jim Densham from Cycling UK Scotland.
Well, definitely, you know, where cycle lanes are going to have the most use and be the most practical for people, what we need to do is plan a proper, you know, network of dense cycle infrastructure throughout our cities and towns, and make that practical for people to use, and then they will use it and it will improve safety. And unless we have that plan and we stop this practice of doing little bits here and there that don't link up, that then people don't use, you know, we need to have real consistency, then we will see general public acceptance, because they will be useful and people will get used to them. And then quickly, just going back to the e-bikes, you know, to make people use them, the problem is at the moment, you know, if you go to Glasgow, you've got to get the Nextbike app, or if you go to the Just Eats app in Edinburgh, what we need is you know, to have integrated ticketing on smartphones and apps and whatever, where you can just quite easily get off the train and jump on a bike wherever, in whichever city, and in a national sort of integrated system. And in that way, people don't have to think, have I got the right infrastructure? It's not my daily use, but they can just do it. And I'd really encourage that is, you know, a practical thing that any party could take up in the future.
I think that's a fair point. I think if you, you know, you arrive at a city that you're perhaps unfamiliar with, and suddenly find you have to download a separate app, you're probably not going to do it. So yeah, I think maybe a bit more joined up.
Fine. Well, I'm afraid we're run out of time. Thank you, all of you, for your questions. I'm sorry that we haven't asked all of them, but hopefully the themes that you've suggested have been raised and aired. And thanks also for the members of the panel for discussing things with Graham. So it's just leads me to hand over to the Transform Scotland Policy Officer, Marie Ferdelman, to wind things up.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, so I'm just going to say a few short words at the end. So as Matt said earlier, this has been the first in our Moving the Vote event series, and we'll be speaking to representatives of the other main parties in the coming months. The next event will be on Thursday, the 11th of March, with Carol Ford from the Liberal Democrats. And you can sign up for that event on our website as well, just as you did for this one. And we'll also be sharing the details of that event on social media. Well, we'd love to see all of you there again. And please also feel free to share the invitation and send us your questions. These can be the same questions as you've asked Graham, or different questions depending on what you're interested in. And with that, I think we'll finish. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who came and shared their questions. And thank you very much to Graham for answering them. And thanks to Alistair very much for chairing this event. And and with that, hope you all have a good week.
I'll just say thank you to everyone for attending. I'm going to thank Alistair for chairing it so well, and I'd even thank David Hanson, who doesn't seem to like me very much, but I'm sure he's a lovely guy. Yeah, thanks everyone for